Okay, good morning, everybody. Let's get started. Last week we finished up by looking at the last of comets, asteroids, and trans-Neptunian objects, or TNOs for short. So there's just one more item I kind of want to discuss about comets before we kind of move on to our discussion of the moon, and that was that a few weeks ago I was asked after class about a new comet that had been recently discovered, and I was not aware of it at the time. So I looked into it, and it turns out actually there's quite a few comets that have been recently discovered and continue to be discovered. And so online I found a chart, this chart out here, which is from a website ran by a gentleman named Gideon van Buitenen. I think he's from the Netherlands. And his hobby is putting out information about comets online. So he's a kind of an amateur hobbyist astronomer. And so this chart is on his website, and it shows the recently discovered comets that have been discovered, and this is just over the last 6 months. Okay, and it shows 22 of them here, along with another 4 that have yet to be confirmed to be comets. And I was kind of surprised by this. I didn't realize there was that many new comets being discovered. So some of the comets are discovered by amateur astronomers, and some of them have been discovered by NASA's Atlas project. We've talked about Atlas. And then there's a host of other telescopes that are also, looking at the sky continually, looking for objects out in our solar system and beyond. So one particular comet that is getting a lot of attention lately is one that has been named 3I Atlas, and the Atlas means that it was discovered by one of the Atlas telescopes. It was discovered on July 1st of 2025 by the Atlas telescope in Rio Huarto, sometimes Hurtado, I think I'm pronouncing that right, in Chile. So this, of course, is one of the 4 that are included in the Atlas project. And by new, of course, I mean it's a discovery that's new to us. It's not like it's a new comet. It's just we now just discovered it. So we discussed earlier off this that the Atlas project goal is to provide an early warning system to potential things that could strike the Earth and potentially impact the Earth and damage it. And it can do this hopefully within a few weeks or even just a few days before they strike the Earth. And there's been a number of discoveries that have been made by these Atlas telescopes, including they also had filmed the DART impact that we talked about when the DART project impacted the asteroid Didymos, trying to change its trajectory. And so the claim from NASA here is that this is a newly discovered comet, and it's proof of being what is termed an interstellar object. So what that basically means is it came from somewhere outside of our solar system. And if that were the case, this would be important news for us, because if it's confirmed to be correct, it would be consistent with the thought that there are comets out there somewhere beyond our solar system that enter in our solar system. And then, of course, that means there have to be some kind of a source for these comets outside of our solar system. And we talked about the Oort cloud and other, imaginary sources of comets. The Oort cloud's never been discovered, but they're assuming something out there is, sending out all these comets. And if this was the case, this would be inconsistent with the hydroplate theory that we're discussing here. In that hydroplate theory proposes an origin of all the comets to have been from ejected materials from the Earth that were ejected out past the Earth's atmosphere into outer space. And as, of course, as a result of the Great Flood. And there were special circumstances, of course, that allowed these comets and asteroids and TNOs to actually, form. And so these will be as a result of the Great Flood, when the great fountains of the Great Deep would have burst forth, as of course recorded in Genesis 7:11. So it'd be important to take a look at this and see what this, what's going on here. Is there evidence of this comet actually coming from somewhere outside of our solar system, as NASA is claiming? So according to a report in the Astronomical Journal, this is volume 170, it says this comet appears to have originated from either the Milky Way's thin disk or thick disk. Okay, so here now they're saying it appears to have come from the thin disk or thick disk. So here's a representation of what we're talking about here. The Milky Way is the galaxy that we are in, we live in. And our solar system is inside the Milky Way. And this is an artist's impression of looking at the Milky Way galaxy from a side view. So think like Frisbee, so to speak. And it's called a spiral galaxy. And according to Wikipedia, and I think about this for a second, because this is really incredible, it is estimated there are between 2 billion and 2 trillion galaxies out there in our observable universe. So we live in the Milky Way, of course, which contains our solar system, but they're saying between 2 billion and 2 trillion. That's a pretty big range right there in and of itself. But that's just, I mean, to my mind, find that mind-blowing. But the Roay Astronomical Society in this article on July 11th of 2025 states that this interstellar object that's newly been discovered may be the oldest comet ever seen, and if that was the case, and it originated from the thick disk, if that's the case, it could be at least 7 billion years old. Now, that makes it older than our solar system. Now, according again to evolutionary theory, which states that our solar system evolved around 4.6 billion years ago from a vast cloud of swirling dust, but we find there are many undisputed observations that contradict these current theories of how our solar system supposedly evolved from a dust cloud. So we'll be looking at that subject in just a few slides from now. But at any rate, 4.6 billion years is a much shorter time than 7 billion years, and that really stretches the imagination to consider that comets could last that long. So we discussed earlier regarding comets that the comets actually lose some of their mass, and this happens when they pass near the sun, or they'll collide with planets or other objects, or moons or celestial objects. And also if a comet passes near a large planet, it can either be torn apart or ejected out of the solar system and never return. So these ejections from our solar system have been observed many times. Again, we talked about that earlier. We've seen comets leave our solar system, but we haven't seen any actually come in, although they're claiming this now. In the vast regions of space far out from the sun, or far from being disturbed or perturbed by planets, they still do lose some of their mass, however. They just do it at a slower rate. So at given loss rates, it's kind of easy to compute the maximum age of a comet. And these calculations show that the maximum age of a comet could be maybe a few million years, if it was undisturbed, but not billions. And remember, a billion is 1,000 million, so we're talking about a vastly different number here. So obviously, their prevalence makes sense if the entire solar system was created just a few thousand years ago, but not if it arose billions of years ago. Comets just don't logically last that long, but this is kind of what they're claiming here. And of course, we discussed earlier about the mystery of how they could have formed in the first place, which is never really answered by evolutionary theory. They say, well, some planet failed to form, or some planet exploded, and then they don't have any process of how these things would have formed, even if that were the case. So we see through hydroplate theory and through looking at it from a biblical standpoint that we actually do have a solid, scientifically sound process for how they could have formed from the special circumstances that occurred as a result of this ejected materials, as a result of the rupture phase of the Great Flood. So let's look at how they discovered this and where it was discovered. So 3I Atlas was discovered in a starry region of the sky. So this picture up here shows, I'm sure you've looked up and seen something similar to this, especially if you're out away from the city. You can see that the sky in some areas is just absolutely full of stars. It's really incredible. So the discovery of the image by Atlas is shown in the inset image here. So see if you can see the red image here. This is where it was found, and then this is here. It's blown up, larger so you can see it. And then if you notice, there's little lines here that indicate where it actually is. So how easy do you think it would be to discern that pinpoint there from that? I mean, this kind of starts to explain how these things are really not that easy to see. The area is so dense in stars that it would be hard for the comet to discern it from the stars itself in the background. So this comet was not discovered until it was in between the orbits of Jupiter and Saturn. Now this is a distance of around 5 to 6 astronomical units. And if you remember, astronomical unit is the distance from the Earth to the Sun. So that's 1 astronomical unit. It just helps you get a perspective of distances here. Even though the distances are crazy, you can't really understand them. At least it's hard to understand it. But you know, it just provides a convenient way to kind of compare things. So the Sun is about 93 million miles from the Earth. So Jupiter to the Sun is about 5.2 astronomical units. And although 3I has been discovered at a distance of around 5 to 6 astronomical units from the Sun, realize that stars in this picture in the background of this image are immensely further away. The closest star to us, other than the Sun, is Proxima Centauri and Alpha Centauri. And these stars are out at a distance of approximately 25 trillion miles, or about 4.25 light years away from us. So that calculates out to be 268,000 astronomical units away from the Earth. So that's incredible. And then the next closest star beyond those two is called Barnard's star, and that's just under 6 light years. And then Wolf 359 is just under 8 light years away. And then the top 10 goes out to around 8 to 10 light years away. So these pinpricks of light that you're seeing in the background are from distances far, far greater away. Even though they look, obviously, trying to pick out that out of all of that must be a monumental task. So these, you know, are just incredibly far away. So realize now that our Sun is 8.5 light minutes away from us here on Earth. Now, I said light minutes, not light years. So what that basically means is that when the light leaves the Sun, 8.5 minutes or 8.5 minutes later is when it reaches Earth. So it takes that long to go 93 million miles. Imagine the light from the next closest star now taking 4.25 years to reach us here at Earth. So that is just, I mean, you think about the vastness of this and the size of this. To me, you start getting really amazed at what our Creator is capable of doing. I mean, it is astounding. It's just absolutely astounding. So after its discovery, I think one of the reasons it was kind of one that people watched was it did pass through our solar system. This happened in October of last year, of 2025. So here on the screen is a representation of the path that 3I took as it passed through our solar system, and it passed closest to the Sun. And the Sun, of course, is in the middle of the screen here, you see in yellow. And then we see the other planets. We see the orbital pass of Mercury, which is the closest planet to the Sun, and it's represented in brown here. And then you've got Venus in green, the Earth in red, and then you've got Mars, Mars is the next one in red. And then way out here you see Jupiter. So Jupiter's out here in the yellow circle. So this comet, if you watch this animation here, you'll see it come through, and it's closer to the Sun than the Earth. Theirs is actually on the other side as it passes through. So there really wasn't any imminent danger of it, striking the Earth or coming close to the Earth. But it was kind of a concern because it was coming that close to our solar system. So the big question we're considering here is does this newly discovered comet come from outside of our solar system? As we just mentioned, they did not see 3I Atlas until it was between the orbits of Jupiter and Saturn, only 5 or 6 astronomical units from the Earth. So I posed this question in an email that I sent to Kevin Lee. Now, we talked about Kevin Lee last week and the week before. He's one of the leading proponents of hydroplate theory. He's basically a nuclear submarine engineer who, in the Navy, while in the Navy, came to Christ. So he's got a tremendous background in technical, science. And so I've been in contact with Kevin and other people, actually, as part of hydroplate theory. and posed him the question in an email about this comet being from outside of our solar system, along with my guess is that it's going to be found to be a very long orbital period comet that might have the appearance of originating from outside of our solar system, but actually did not. So again, according to Hydroplate theory, the origin of all the comets, asteroids, and TNOs are as a result of the Great Flood and the special circumstances necessary for them to even form. Therefore, there should not be any that come from outside of our solar system, from some imagined Oort cloud or some thin disk or somewhere where these special circumstances wouldn't be present that would even allow them to even form. And then, of course, the distances are just crazy, you know, to be able to get here without having them dissipate before they even got here. So this is even more difficult to explain when you take into account that those who take an evolutionary assumption for the origins are stating this comet appears to originate from the Milky Way's thin or thick disk, which now they're saying is 7 billion years away, light years away. Would have estimated to take 7 billion years for it to come here. So knowing that comets, again, don't last forever, it doesn't make sense. So Kevin responded back to me with a short video on this subject, which he states that it just as we discussed, 3I Atlas was not discovered until it was between the orbits of Jupiter and Saturn. Having only discovered it, it was already well within our solar system. So how can they make the claim that it came from outside of our solar system? They didn't have any way to track its trajectory before that. And we also see that there are bodies, as we've discussed in the last few weeks, that are out there, far out, beyond Neptune actually, that are still orbiting the sun. And that would have to be considered still part of our solar system because the sun's gravitational influence still keeps them in orbit around the sun. Remember we talked about the Kuiper belt being out at about 30 to 50 astronomical units from the sun, and the Neptune's 30.1 astronomical units out. But there's TNOs that are much further out than that. There was 12 of them that we discussed. The furthest out one is called Sedna. And this one's amazing because its orbit at its furthest point from the sun can be as far as over 900 astronomical units from the sun. Now, this is a staggering distance. So if you look at Neptune being about 30 astronomical units from the sun, we're now talking about something that is now 30 times out further than Neptune is, and yet still is part of our solar system because the Sedna still is in orbit around the sun. So I'm thinking this would have to be the outer boundary of our solar system. So any comets that have very long orbital periods, when there are some, are out there in distances actually up to around 700 astronomical units at their furthest point. So you can see, unless you see it coming from beyond 900 astronomical units, how can you make the assertion that it came from beyond our solar system? And that's basically what Kevin said. He said it has the appearance of coming from outside our solar system, but it actually didn't. So the only logical answer, basically, is that it came from Earth, just like all the other comets and asteroids. 3I Atlas was a very long period comet that was ejected out at very high velocities. It would put it into a highly elliptical orbit, a very long orbit that would have been maybe thousands of years in length. And then now it's probably returning back for the very first time. So this could give the comet an appearance of coming from outside the solar system when it actually did not. So again, I think this gives us a good answer here for that question. It has all the same components as other comets and asteroids, certainly suggests a common origin to all the other celestial objects, just as we looked into with looking at comets and asteroids in the past. So in summary, we now want to just take a very quick look at what are the origins of comets and asteroids and TNOs. So what do evolutionists speculate? Evolutionary theories on their origins are not supported by the evidence, and they always are surprised and shocked and puzzled and amazed, et cetera, at what is found, because it's not what is expected. And if you look at evolution and evolutionary theory, it's not just here talking about astronomy. We're talking about everything. We're talking about origins of life. We're talking about, I mean, there's just every subject. Constantly they're puzzled and amazed and just are shocked by what they find, you know. Non-hydroplate theory creationists will say that comets and asteroids and TNOs were part of the six-day creation. But I think we've shown that that's not consistent with Scripture. Doesn't make sense. I mean, it wouldn't be something we would have expected because these objects strike the Earth, cause damage. So that how could that be very good? But the hydroplate theory's explanation is that they were a consequence of the flood, and all the evidence that we looked at supports this premise. They find components of Earth on asteroids. They find the very same materials, and they also find organic matter. They found nucleotides, which are the building blocks of DNA, and they found amino acids. They found 14 of the 20 amino acids found in living things on asteroids. So that certainly suggests that they came from Earth. So I think they were a consequence of the flood, and I think, again, all this evidence points to that. Okay, so now for the next subject, I want to focus our attention on the moon. And this is, I think, very interesting because there's a lot of questions about the moon that we can ask about it. One question would be, where did it come from? Where did the moon come from? How did it get there? And also we observe that the moon has many strange surface features and also internal features. And how can these unique features of the moon be explained? So, for example, why are the near side and far side of the moon completely different? Does secular science provide any logical answers? It might surprise you, probably doesn't, but that evolutionary astronomers have a great trouble in accounting for the origin as well as the unique features of the moon. So we will see during this study that evolutionary theories as to the origin of the moon are highly speculative and completely inadequate. And there's approximately 4 major competing hypotheses in secular science about how the moon originated, but we'll see that all of them have serious scientific problems. So why is this important? As we established earlier, again, we see that scientific evidence supporting a recent supernatural creation of the moon and its formation of its unusual features fits perfectly within observable science and Scripture. In other words, they're compatible with each other. It's not this science versus Christianity. It's not science versus religion. It's a bad science versus scientific evidence that supports what the Bible tells us. So again, the goal of creation science is to interpret scientific knowledge and then compare it with what the Bible states to see if they're in harmony with each other. And every time I've done that, I find that it is. And that has strengthened my faith in ways, and it should strengthen all of our faiths. And so we investigate major events in history. The major events would be the creation week of Genesis 1 and 2, and the account of the Great Flood in Genesis 6 through 8. So how does creation science figure into the moon's origins and its unique features? The origin of the moon, of course, is told to us. It's explained to us in Scripture as something God supernaturally created on day 4 during the creation week, where God created the sun, the moon, and the stars. Genesis 1:16 reads, God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. It's kind of interesting too. He just also made the stars. It's like it's no big deal, right? This is a huge deal, but he just states it that way. Amazing how sometimes I find in Scripture a few words have such great extending meaning. I mean, it's just amazing. So here we have the origin of the moon according to Scripture. God made it, right? Made it during creation week. He made the sun and all the planets of our solar system, as well as all the galaxies with the amazing number of stars that we just talked about. But we can also see the moon also plainly has a number of surface features that are unusual. There are an immense number of craters all over its surface. The moon also experiences moonquakes, which is basically the lunar equivalent to an earthquake here on Earth. And almost all moonquakes are on one side of the moon, the side of the moon that faces the Earth. Why would that be? As we'll see later in the class, too, when we get to further on, the source of the Earth's earthquakes can be traced back to being a result of the Great Flood. And we'll see some scientific evidence for that. But the moon also has moonquakes. Well, how did those form? And the moon also has a surprising amount of heat flowing out of the moon just below the surface, and yet the interior of the moon is relatively cool. So because the moon is not cooled off yet, it is an indication that it's a much younger age than what evolutionists can explain, in that over billions of years, the moon should have cooled off by now. It shouldn't be that warm or as hot as it is. And this is also an indication that something happened to the moon relatively recently, over maybe a period of a few thousands of years ago, not millions or billions. So we'll see that this internal heat flow that is unexpectedly large can be explained as a consequence of the flood. So how about the moon? Was it created this way with immense craters and moonquakes and internal heat just below the surface? Doesn't make much logical sense to me that he created it with these craters, giving it the appearance that it had been struck many, many times. We also see during the creation week, as we talked about earlier, there wasn't any asteroids or comets mentioned in Scripture, nothing out in outer space. And that would seemingly not fit with God's declaration of it being very good at the end of creation week, because these objects can strike the earth, cause damage. So that leaves one other possibility, that they were a result of the flood. So we see creation, moon's created during the creation week on day 4. The cratering and the strange features of the moon, then it's left, hey, this looks to be bestly explained by the Great Flood. So if the moon were impacted heavily over billions of years of age, then we also would have expected the Earth to have been impacted many, many times as well. We should have been impacted many more times than the moon, because the Earth has a much larger gravitational pull than the moon does, and would have much greater gravitational influence that would have been much more likely now to have hit the moon, the Earth rather than the moon. And so we're going to discuss that a little bit more in the coming slides here. So here on the screen this is called Barringer Meteor Crater. This is here in northern Arizona. And this is the best preserved impact crater here on Earth, and was created by an impact of an asteroid. And of course, these impact craters are created when an object flying through space impacts the surface of a larger body, like a planet or a moon. So the Earth has only been impacted a rather small number of times by asteroids and meteors compared with what we see on the moon. The moon has been obviously impacted many, many times. The moon, I'm sorry, which has almost no atmosphere, is covered with impact craters so large and well preserved that we can see them actually here from Earth. We don't need a telescope to see these. So evolutionists, what do they claim? They'll claim that the Earth has been hit countless numbers of times over its 4.5 billion year life, but the evidence of this has largely been erased by erosion or plate tectonics. Now, plate tectonics is a subject we'll get to, but plate tectonics is currently the most accepted theory in geology about different plates that move on the Earth and subduct underneath each other. There's no evidence for this, actually, as we'll get into that later on. But looking at just how many craters of the moon, obviously it's been impacted many, many times. And so a mechanism for such a bombardment should be properly explained. We also see that the current accepted creationist theories outside of hydroplate theory fail to adequately document and explain the sources of this lunar bombardment. And as we discussed at the end of the creation week, again, we wouldn't expect there to be errant projectiles or bullets out there basically whizzing around our solar system that would have struck the moon or the Earth. It just doesn't fit. So one of the keys in any young Earth creation model is that it needs to address that these features happened over the surface of the moon rather recently, and there will be an event that could explain this. And so, again, we want to be able to convincingly have answers for ourselves, but also show this so that we can discuss this scientifically and biblically with people who might have questions on this. And again, it gives us a unique opportunity that we can reach out and get the attention of maybe people who are skeptics, but these kind of things can open up conversations that can ultimately lead you to be able to talk to them about Jesus Christ and the overwhelming evidences of what the Bible says being true. So this really is the purpose of creation science. So let's take a brief look at the various evolutionary theories regarding the origin of the moon, and then we'll look into explaining its unusual features. So first, the moon, the origin itself. Is there a valid scientific theory that can explain the origin of and evolution of the existence of the moon? And there isn't. I'll tell you right, I'll just give you the spoiler. There isn't one. So, but I'll show you just briefly what the current leading theories are regarding that. So what we're looking at basically is essentially we're studying in our discussions of comets, asteroids, planets, and the moon out to the distant stars and galaxies. This is termed cosmology. So what's a good definition of cosmology? Cosmology is the study of the origin, the current state, and future of our universe. In other words, the study of the cosmos. And this, of course, is not to be confused with cosmetology, which is the study of and application of beauty treatment, including hairstyling, skincare, and cosmetics. This is where you're supposed to laugh. I threw that in just as a joke. I even threw the little flying saucer in there just as a little joke. So when we look at the study of cosmology, we find many undisputed observations that contradict theories about how our solar system supposedly evolved, including the moon. So how could planets and moons have originated? So commonly taught as the origin of our solar system is it was a swirling cloud of dust, but detailed analysis have shown that neither stars or planets could form from an interstellar gas cloud. So particles of dust should not form this way. They are going to much be more likely of expanding away from each other. And experiments have shown that this is always the case, that they fragment away from each other rather than sticking together. Gases rapidly dissipate in the outer vacuum of space. And also, as we look at each of the planets in our own solar system, they're unique. So if all the planets and known moons evolved from the same materials, that swirling cloud of dust, if it's the current assumption of evolutionary theory, they should have many similarities. However, they don't. We observe the composition of each of the planets. We see they're made up of different materials. Some planets are spinning backwards from others. They should all be orbiting and spinning the same way, but they're not. We would all expect them to spin in the same direction, but Venus, Uranus, and Pluto spin backwards from the other planets. Some planets also have moons that are orbiting backwards. So each of the almost 200 known moons in our solar system should orbit its planet in the same direction if it came from the same swirling gas cloud. But more than 30 have backwards orbits. And also several planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, have moons that orbit in both directions. So how does that explain? I mean, how do moons orbit in different directions around the same planet? And they also have surprisingly different magnetic fields. Yet most planetary studies begin by assuming they evolved from this cloud. How does evolutionary theory explain this? All from the same dust cloud. Logically, they all should be similar, but they're not. So in standard evolutionary fashion, the evidences that contradict the theory are simply ignored, or we're told that we just haven't discovered the answer yet, and more research is needed, and perhaps someday we'll discover the answer. So this is kind of like the cosmic scientific version of comedian W.C. Fields, who says, "Get away from me, kid, you bother me." So today, scientists, educators, or in fact anyone that even mentions the idea that there might be an appearance of design in what we observe in the universe is ignored or ridiculed. Sometimes they're denied tenure and grants, and they're even fired for expressing such a thought. So the heavy-handed suppression of ideas opposing evolution has led to today's present state of academia. The media and the education system, where those that even question evolutionary paradigm are effectively silenced or forced into submission. I mean, I've seen this over and over and over again. And today, of course, every major college or university, or even middle school or elementary school teaches that everything evolved. And creation, if it's even mentioned, typically is called a myth, and it's not to be taken seriously. So students, of course, put a lot of trust into their teachers, right? So one book that I picked up, and you may want to read this because this is amazing, and you really ought to be, aware of what's going on. It's called Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, written by Alex Newman. And this goes over the history of our education system and what's happened when evolutionary paradigms and theory is basically pushed by the education system. This book is scary. It is really scary as to what's going on. So today, students a lot of times are told to memorize in order to pass a test, not to think, okay? So I think what we want to do is look at all the possibilities. Look at what's out there. This is how you look at producing critical thinking, you know, to be able to look at different theories, see which one best fits, and, you know, just not memorize to pass a test, right? And I don't think our schools do that. A very good job of that. So anyway, I think this is why this is such an important topic.
Hey, Steve?
Yes?
I got a question and a comment about for you. So, if we claim that God created everything, how come everything? Let me finish what I'm saying, and then you'll see where I'm going. If God created everything, how come everything doesn't rotate the same way? If nature created everything, so then the assumption is, why weren't the laws of nature followed in those? If the origin was from the same, what you call it, cosmic cloud or something like that.
Yeah.
So wouldn't nature then have to follow the same laws of nature that the Earth was created in, that the other planets would be created in? And I understand the differentiation that would be that God would say, you know, I'm going to make this go this way.
Maybe he did it this way to say, hey, it didn't evolve. I mean, I really don't have an answer for that one.
But wouldn't the laws
Something you'd have to ask God, I think.
Wouldn't the laws that govern the creation of the Earth under a natural system, under a system, you know, a scientific natural system, wouldn't those same laws have to be followed in the creation of those other planets?
I don't think so, again, because remember, they're created in their fully formed states. They didn't evolve. God didn't make evolution happen.
Right.
It's like our human bodies, for example. He created them instantly, fully formed. It wasn't some process of, hey, let's make this gradual steps finally end up with a human being. So for whatever reason, God decided to do that. And maybe it was because of this. Maybe it's say, hey, they'll see this someday and say, why, if it's from swirling clouds.
Other things
Yeah.
follow the laws that
Yeah. Well, they do follow the laws of, yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, well, I mean, moons orbit planets because of the laws of physics, you know. God may have started them from different planets, you know, orbiting in different directions. I don't have an answer for that one specifically, but yes.
But if the rocks or these asteroids, comets, all these things are projected from the flood, it could be, depending on what way they were spun out.
Well, we're talking back on creation week here, not when the flood happened, when the comets and asteroids were formed. So we're now talking about where did the moon come from? I think God created it the way he did, just as he created everything, you know, in our universe. I mean, multiple miracles, not just one miracle. I mean, we're talking about, you know, everything.
I was talking about asteroids and all that are
Yeah.
flung out, you know.
Yeah, that comes as a consequence of the flood. I think we can show scientifically that that's the case, you know, as we've been talking about. So, okay, so let's go back to being serious now. No more WC Field. So there's actually several different theories that have been proposed to account for the origin of the moon outside of it being created on day 4 of creation week. So I'm not going to cover all of them in the interest of time, but I do want to look briefly at least at a couple of them. The first one's called fission theory, and it was proposed by the astronomer George Darwin, who was the son of Charles Darwin. And he proposed that the Earth spun so fast at one time that a chunk of it broke off, with the Pacific Ocean basin being the scar that was left from this spinning Earth. So imagine, you know, riding your bike through mud, and mud flying off your bicycle wheel the faster you rode your bike. So that's kind of the thought here. You'd have to have your bike going at a fairly good speed to do that. So the problems with this, and there are a number of problems with this, is that the Earth would have to spin much faster, about 10 times faster than it does today. The Earth could never spin fast enough. The length of the day would only be about 2 hours at this rate of speed, and everything else on the surface of the Earth would be in danger of spinning off also. So there's no evidence that the Earth has ever spun that fast. And how would it slow down? I mean, fast enough so things just didn't fly off. So the Apollo missions also that went to the moon brought back lunar material that proved that the moon could not have come from the Earth, since the composition of the moon rocks were too different from Earth. Now, they have found rocks on the moon that are from the Earth. We'll talk about that a little later. But the vast majority of the moon is just different compositionally than the Earth is. So if it's spun off from the Earth, you would have expected it to be the same as the Earth, but it's not. So several other problems with this one, but this one has pretty much fallen out of favor. Also, speaking about the Apollo missions to the moon, did you know that there were a number of unmanned missions to the moon that occurred prior to the manned Apollo missions that ultimately sent humans to land on the moon successfully? So these unmanned missions were called the Ranger programs, and the Ranger program had 3 successful moon landings, one in 1964 and 2 in 1965. And they sent back over 4,300 photos of the moon back to the Earth. And these images revealed craters caused by impacts that were the dominant features of the moon's surface, with great craters then containing these great large craters that contain smaller craters inside the larger ones. And remember, this is on the near side of the moon, the side that always faces the Earth. And remember, this will be important over the next few slides as we talk about this. And then after Ranger, there were 5 successful unmanned missions to the moon during what was called the Surveyor program. This was 1966 to 1968. Remember, the first moon landing was in 1969. So the purpose of these missions was to increase our knowledge about the surface of the moon in order to pave the way for the Apollo missions that would come shortly thereafter. And so from the NASA website regarding the Surveyor mission, they state that the first image of Surveyor 1 in 1966 showed that its landing foot firmly was placed on top of the lunar soil, meaning the landing was possible. They go on to state determination of adequate bearing strength in the lunar soil was important for the Apollo planning. Why was this? The concern was that the astronauts, if they landed on the moon and the dust that was on the moon had accumulated over literally billions of years, this dust would be so deep that the astronauts would actually sink in and disappear in this dust. So the anticipated dust problem that they thought was going to be there was based on their uniformitarian beliefs and assumptions that the moon must be billions of years old. And as we see, that didn't happen. And the amount of dust on the moon is actually what would be expected if the moon was only thousands of years old. Maybe the moon is not as old as they assumed. Okay, I heard that bell. We'll have to pick up here next week. Thank you. We have one more week, and then I'll take my break, and then we'll come back and we will continue. We'll finish the moon next week, and then we'll continue with origins of mammoths, and we'll continue with
Thanks, Stevie.
all kinds of different stuff to come. So. Thank you for your attendance. Appreciate it.